Well, thank you all. I usually talk about energy, renewable energy, and the big picture of energy in the world. So talking about corporate social responsibility is, I guess, until recently, in the 25 plus years of being in the business, I'd never really considered having a name for what we were trying to do. And I guess getting started in wind energy back in 1982, we didn't have these sort of bigger picture ideals of what business should do. But I started in wind energy because of problems with oil, nuclear power back in the 70s. And I guess by mistake or inadvertently, I'm here to talk about social responsibility and energy and how it all works. But to me, it's always been part of the whole deal, that going forward, we will probably have to use energy sources that are a little different if we're going to be socially responsible and take care of our society in a different way. So I'm going to talk first. I got a couple dozen slides. I'm going to go through those pretty quickly and save a bunch of time so that we can have an interactive discussion. So I'll be looking for questions from you all and in this topic. So hopefully 15 minutes or so talking about the big picture of energy, because I usually do that just to frame everybody what our problem is, because you can't solve a problem unless you know really what the problem is, and probably be a little grim on how big our problem really is so that we can react to it. Because one of the things we're seeing is we tend to increment, we tend to do things the same old ways we've been doing them for the last couple hundred years in our society. And the change that we're looking at is so dramatic, we're going to have to throw away some of that caution probably. We have to move much faster. So first, just a quick introduction. Earth Turbines, the company I formed a few years ago to do residential wind. That's basically who we are. NRG Systems, I founded in 1982, basically in the large wind technology field, wind measurement. My wife took over as CEO 4 years ago, and as I get my head out of that business and into a new business, we're sort of separating but growing in different areas. Quickly, here's what the problem is. Fossil fuels. This one-time jackpot. Basically, we won the lottery when we figured out fossil fuels. It's just millions of years of solar energy that we're going to use in a 200-year time period, 1900 to 2100. Basically, we'll use all the fossil energy the world produced for us over millions of years. So it's like living on the lottery winnings. And what that has allowed us to do, as most of you probably know, is grow our population. Here we are at the turn of the century, 1.5 billion people. We're at 6.5 billion, headed to 8 to 10. And that's a very dramatic problem. And we're living, all of us, in this era of huge growth. And as you know, exponential growth can't happen forever. And so that's the crux of the problem. And just to put this in perspective, oil prices hit bottom in 1999. We've had this trend for all these years, down, down, down. Oil's gotten cheaper and cheaper and cheaper until around the year 2000. So 1900, 2000, 2100. I think you're getting what I'm getting at. We're at the bottom and now climbing out of the cheapest energy that the world has ever seen. And that was around the year 2000. And surprisingly, the cost is going up a lot more dramatically than getting to that low cost. It took 80 years to drive down the cost of fossil energy. And this curve is a mirror of our resource curve. And I'll show you that next. But the critical thing is oil is 40% of our energy. Natural gas, another 20% or so. Coal, another 20%. So 80 to 85% of our energy in the world today is fossil-based. Now, here we are on the oil curve of production. We're at peak oil production. Doesn't mean we're out of oil. It's just that we're half gone. And going forward, our depletion, we're going to hit the peak here. We've always grown oil supply production, but now we're hitting a plateau, and we're going to fall off the other side. So this is a huge, huge change event as our population keeps growing. If our population started to decline at 5% a year, maybe we could follow the fossil fuel curves down the other side, but it's not. So that's why we're at this huge inflection point, big paradigm change on what's going to happen in energy. And we're probably seeing it in the financial markets. We're seeing it in a lot of places. We have a lot of things that are been based, basically our financial system's been based on the idea of infinite growth, based on our economic theory, which is based on an infinite world. We have a finite world. We can't do growth forever. So things are in stress. And now it's sort of a wake-up call to where we have to go. So peak oil is happening. It may have happened a couple years ago. We won't know for a few more years exactly when it happened because it's a rear-view mirror thing. You don't know it until it really happened. And the reason, whoops, I'll go back. The reason the peak oil theory works is the U.S. peaked in 1970, and it was the second largest, had the second largest reserves of oil in the world after Saudi Arabia. We peaked, and the theory works. We know it works. The rest of the world is peaking. So quickly, I say Americans, we are a huge part of this problem. We're only discovering 1 barrel for every 3. It's a carbon-based fuel. It's finite. We would need 6 Earths if everybody in the world consumed like we did. So China, India, the rest of the world would like to live like we do, but it's basically impossible to do that. And here we are representing just 5% of the population, but we consume over a quarter of the world's oil. And by the way, we consume about a quarter of the world's resources in general, whether it's copper, iron, whatever, it's there. So, we have to look at ourselves. It's really hard sometimes for me to see that we tend to go and try to teach the rest of the world of how to do the right things when we can't even do the right things ourselves. So that gets into later when we talk about the social responsibility. We tend to be kind of hypocritical in our views of how we do things. I'm not going to go through all these, but there's a bunch of energy facts here. And one of the key things is sometimes people say oil at $100 a barrel is expensive. But that's equal to about 15 cents for an 8-ounce bottle of oil. You can't buy bottled water for 15 cents for 8 ounces. So, and here is this thing that we've developed that runs our whole economy, runs our life. It does, plastics, drugs, pesticides, fertilizers. It's all oil-based. You've heard the statistic that 1 calorie of food that you're eating, 10 calories of fossil fuels go into it. So we've been very good at converting fossil fuels into food, and that's why we grew our population. Quickly on wind, since I'm in the wind business, we have large wind. It's taking off worldwide, very successful. It's a near-term, it's a solution. It's the lowest cost electricity going forward. We're lower cost than natural gas, nuclear, coal, if you build new capacity. And it's renewable. Community wind, we'll see community wind around Vermont. So it's mid-sized wind, so where people, individuals can all group together to buy a larger wind turbine and share the output. We have a group net metering law in Vermont that will allow this to happen. It hasn't happened yet. We've got to get a group together, actually do it. But since this spring, the law has been in place. And small wind will never do what large wind will do. We'll be a few percent of the market, but people want to live and have a wind turbine in their backyard. That's Jan and my house in Charlotte. We have a wind turbine in our backyard. Provides half of our energy for our home. The other half is with solar electric, and we have solar hot water and pellet for heating. So you can do almost 100% renewables But this is a retrofit too. If we got to build a new house, we'd use a lot less energy. But a 1970s house has some heating loads and so on. Just quickly, wind in Vermont. You can't tell what all those red dots and lines and stuff are, but basically the point is we have a tremendous resource. The only resources we have in Vermont that are renewable are really the wind, sun, the geothermal heat in the earth, and hydro. So we're going to have to live in Vermont on renewable resources going forward. And the myth that Vermont doesn't have any wind, we have tremendous amounts of wind. And the key thing is our electrical demand right now is 700 megawatts, but we have 6,000 to 8,000 megawatts of wind available if we wanted to use it. Now, getting to choosing our energy future, there's a lot of different things we can do. The renewables are there. We have oil, natural gas. Oil supply is peaking. Natural gas is peaked in North America, basically, and it will peak in the world. Any finite resource will peak and fall down the other side. The only way we're going to be getting natural gas in North America in greater amounts in the future is liquefied natural gas that's imported on tanker ships. Then we have nuclear power. I'm not a big fan of nuclear power for basically technical reasons and social reasons. It turns out that every country that ever got a civilian nuclear reactor for power ends up building a bomb. And it's sort of discouraging to me when I read, just last week, Jamaica wants to put in a nuclear power plant. Zimbabwe wants to put in a nuclear power plant. Indonesia wants to put in nuclear power plants. Can we have 140 countries in the world all with their own bomb? And we're trying to stop nuclear proliferation in the U.S. We should not have nuclear weapons. So how do you reverse that trend? You can't just go out and promote nuclear power because it's all tied together. So we're talking about energy, but there's all these other social pieces that are integrated. I'm on the advisory board for the Union of Concerned Scientists, and it's one of their things is to stop nuclear proliferation. But you have to tie those two together, and they're finally tying it together, that to stop nuclear proliferation, you're going to have to work on the civilian nuclear reactor problem. Coal. We hear a lot about coal. We have a lot of coal reserves, but coal is a huge emitter of CO2. CO2 and climate change is hugely related to the depletion of our finite fossil fuels. And I believe coal should probably be saved for our grandkids and their kids as a carbon source to make those plastics and other things. We shouldn't be burning up. We shouldn't be trying to convert it to liquid fuels or doing any of those things. It's too precious, and it's a huge carbon emitter. So, one of the questions is, are we going to get into a crisis due to global warming or depletion? Which one's going to come first? Well, they may both come at the same time, which I think is probably what's happening. As far as dream fuels, I put these down because if you're in denial, you tend to want to look for something that's hopeful. So we dream about the future on these other things. Hydrogen, it's not a source. It has to be generated from something, whether it's fossil fuels or renewables through electrolysis. It's probably not going to be a big energy carrier. Nuclear fusion, it's always been 10 or 20 years in the future, probably always will be. And then one of the best dream fuels is the wishful thinking, and we tend to see that, but that's not going to get us anywhere. Being an engineer, I think it's energy suicide to even look at any of these things. And the biggest thing that we have to do is conserve and change our lifestyles and how we use energy and use efficiency. Because going forward, we're going to have to cut our energy use by 3/4. That's huge, 75 to 80% reduction. And I'll show you how this combines with global warming. This target of an 80% reduction in CO2 by 2050, think it's real. I think a lot of people are now realizing that's what we have to do. We have to get the CO2 back down to 350 parts per million. But to do that, basically all that carbon and reduction in carbon is a reduction in fossil fuel use. They're basically tied together because most of our energy is from fossil fuels, around 85%. Reduce fossil fuel use, reduce carbon. Real simple. We have to change habits. And we have to have the huge development of renewables to do this. Wind, solar, biomass, geothermal. I'm not a big fan of using food for energy. Ethanol, corn-based ethanol is a disaster. We shouldn't duplicate those things. Some fossil fuels will be needed, as I said, coal and so on. But on the top, I said it's basically $1 trillion a year investment to convert our system. It's a huge deal. And if we do $1 billion here, $1 billion there, we're never going to get there. We have to do this in a big way. So it's like shutting down GM, Ford, Toyota, and say, you're going to make wind turbines, you're going to make solar, don't build any more SUVs. Now, that's the sort of effort we're going to have to do. The sooner we do it, like tomorrow. Well, just commenting before we came in here, well, Toyota, GM, Chrysler, they all had 50% reduction in sales compared to last year. Well, you got 50% of their capacity available. Time to change. But we have to have the policy to do that and the political will to do that. So what must be done? We have to do this cut in CO2. Get to 80% reduction. You have to do a 5% reduction every year starting now. If you wait another 5 years, it's going to be 6 or 7% every year you have to do. People, it's a reverse exponential, so you have to compound it going backwards, which is really, really hard. And in the last year, carbon emissions in the world still went up. We haven't even turned the corner of holding them. We have to go down, and we have to start now. 5%, 5%, 5% for 40-some years to get there. It's huge. And so one of the things is a carbon tax. We have to tax the carbon one way or another. The RGGI thing that we just read about, that carbon was sold for $3 and something a ton. It's nowhere close to what carbon emissions are worth. And it's sort of just a little bit of game playing right now. They said, oh, this is going to change things. It's not going to do anything. We have to have aggressive taxing of carbon. The other key part of the message is we're going to be changing to an energy system based upon electricity as the energy carrier. We're going to be moving away from liquid fuels, and we'll become very intensely electricity-based. And luckily, the technologies of wind and solar are electric technologies that can do that. So we'll be moving away from, I think Tom Friedman calls them the hellish fuels, the things that burn and glow from hell, and go to the heavenly fuels of the wind and sun. So I wasn't a big fan of Tom Friedman's first book, The Flat Earth, but his new book, he's figured out in the last 3 years that we have an energy problem. Because in his first book, he had one paragraph about energy, and he didn't address any of it. But now he's figured out with his new book, Flat, Hot, and there you go, that we have a huge, huge problem. So I'm halfway through it, and I think he's got most things right. So it's a great, great read. And going to this move to electricity, we're going to be going to electrified mass transit. I think the personal car by 2050 is gone. You will not be flying around the world anymore. Only the very wealthy will be flying. It will go back to that sort of system. We shouldn't be building new roads, airports, gas stations, car dealerships, natural gas pipelines, refineries. In fact, there's a reason no refineries have been built in the last 20 years in the U.S. Why would an oil company build a refinery if your feedstock is going to disappear? There's no use for a refinery in a post-peak oil world. So, some people know and are paying attention. And the last thing as far as this electricity is we're going to have to nationalize our electric grid. We're going to have to make our electric grid system just like our national highway system. Tie it all together and make it work in a very smart way so that we can use all the renewables and all of this stuff will work. Right now, the grid system is just a mess of different regions and interties. It just doesn't work very well. Just quickly, Vermonters want wind. Vermonters want in-state renewables, contrary to some people's view that they don't. We want to try to take care of ourselves. What's getting in the way? Here's a whole list of things. Poor energy knowledge. One reason I'm here, let's make sure we understand the big energy picture. What we're seeing on Wall Street, greed over morals, that's part of corporate social responsibility. What drives things? Politics. I think we all agree there's really a lack of leadership politically. And it's probably tied to our democracy, that you have to get voted into office. And it's really hard to say a tough message to all the folks that are voting for you, because they tend not to want to vote for you. So it's a really tricky thing. Also, old ways of thinking. I don't know if it was Einstein who said it, but the folks that got us into this problem aren't going to solve it. So, I look at power company executives that are in their, not to be age discriminatory, but if they're in their 60s, they should go golfing. Let us go and fix the system. Let's do something different, because that's what's going to be necessary. And past sunk cost. If we put investment into things that haven't worked, we have a really hard time of just letting that go and saying, that's done. And we have a lot of sunk investment into our fossil-based system. And inability to understand our finite Earth. Just quickly, a lot of you know about our building, but this building uses 1/5 the energy. So there's that 80% reduction. We did it. Technology that's available today works. It's mostly renewable energy powered, solar, wind, and wood pellets. So at the end here, it's possible, and I'm going to sit on this slide for a little while, and then we'll talk, and I'll take questions, but being socially responsible is looking at all these pieces and running your businesses and what you do just in your life, of saying, how do you make that money calculation? How do you do these things? And I guess my wife said it best. It's really just doing what's right, or doing the right thing is always what comes out. And the right thing is to take care of our environment and going to renewables. So, some information sources, and I'll open it up to questions. Right. Wind is a variable resource. Solar is a variable resource. All renewables are really variable resources. Hydro is a variable resource. What happens as soon as you put everything into the pot or a big grid is you can even things out, and things can move around. We can actually shut down hydro dams when the wind's blowing. And an example is country of Denmark, almost 25% wind in that country. In the middle of some winter nights, Denmark has over 100% of their electricity from wind. They have excess. They said, what do? We're fully all wind powered. Their power plants are shut down. Well, they have 2 submarine cables, one to Norway and one to Sweden. And Sweden and Norway say, oh, we want to buy your power. They bid on it and say, oh, Norway, you get it tonight. And they shut down their hydro dams. So they take all the wind power, and then the next day they'll turn their hydro, because the hydro is like a battery. And so by integrating all these pieces, and that's why I'm an advocate of a smart, integrated grid, everything works. But our system was designed over the last 100 years of private utility companies all doing their own little thing. And they don't work on the demand side of our electric system, only on the supply side. Energy efficiency is a demand side management. But a lot more can be done, and then everything will work. You can have wind without any storage or any problems right now at 25% integration, but we can go to 50% with a smart grid.
How can we do that within the state? We're not going to get the whole U.S.
Well, what we can do on the state level is simply demand renewables, and once you get the renewables coming into the system starts to change. It's one of those things that where's the cart and the horse? And I'm always a proponent of you push your solution and then let the system respond, because you can't, you have so much resistance from folks. By just getting it into place and creating the problem, you'll end up solving it.
Could you comment on the Pickens plan?
T. Boone Pickens, yeah, 80-year-old oil man that's now in the wind. Well, T. Boone understands peak oil. He understands a limited world, and he would like to leave a mark on society. I think he's on the right track. I don't totally believe we should use our natural gas to fuel cars. I'm not trying to get rid of the car thing, but he's putting a lot of his own money out there to change things, and I think he's on the right track.
Student question over here?
Oh. Or over there. We'll take one and go back.
I can imagine Vermont as an eco-tourist state. We are the Green Mountain State, and to that end, I wonder again about putting large wind on our ridges as opposed to small wind near our homes, and if you could respond to that.
Okay, yeah, I can play both sides of this, being on both sides, but developing small wind, there is a huge place for large wind. Actually, large wind is going to be probably 98% of the wind energy generated, because you must put large wind where it's windiest, and that's on top of the hills. As far as ecotourism and tourism, it turns out most places, almost every place that's ever been studied, tourists come because of wind turbines. They don't leave because of wind turbines. In Palm Springs, in the desert, all the wind turbines in California, there's tour operators that charge $40 for a tour of the wind farms. And on weekends, they're just swamped. People want to see this. And the studies in Vermont show that people understand large wind turbines produce environmentally friendly power. It's a little different on cell phone towers, because cell phone towers just stand there with all the antennas. But a wind turbine, the large ones, are very slow-moving, graceful. So most people don't have a problem. And I think Vermont, we just took a bus tour, NRG, the whole company went over to Upper New York State 3 weeks ago. We toured the wind farm, and they're constantly touring the wind farm because people want to see it. So I think it will add tourism to the state.
Do you have in mind specific tracts of land in the U.S. that you would use for turbines or solar panels?
Actually, wind can be used almost everywhere except in the southeast. They have very little wind. The Midwest has the most amount of wind, but wind can work almost everywhere. Solar works really everywhere. Solar in Vermont is about half the energy density of Arizona or the deserts. But that's about the range. It's just about a 2-to-1. So solar can work almost everywhere. Turns out Germany in the world is the solar leader now. They have less sun than we do here in Vermont because they're so far north. But they were a leader because of the Green Party pushing public policy to do solar and wind. So really, these technologies will be everywhere.
A lot of us believe that as we move into this future, that economies need to not be global and be more local. So would you comment on large wind, which it would generally most of us think of as a large company coming in, where the money leaves the state then and so forth?
Yeah, that's where the concept of community wind is now gaining a lot of traction. Actually, community wind is the large wind turbines, but it's just a different ownership. Like you say, the money won't flow out to other companies that are somewhere else. And in fact, in the large wind business, because the Americans have been a little slow on the uptake, a lot of the large wind developers are from Spain, Germany, and other places because they saw it before the U.S. corporations did. But we have GE, we have others now investing in wind in the U.S. But as far as a local level, people can get together, and if we do some of these policy changes correctly, I'm a big fan of what Germany has done. They have a thing called a feed-in tariff, where basically It's a standard contract offer to anybody, whether you're a farmer, a homeowner, or a wind developer, to buy power at a certain price depending on the technology. Solar technologies, they're getting almost 80 cents a kilowatt hour. If you put solar on your house, they will give you a check every month for 80 cents for every kilowatt hour you generate. Wind is 15 cents for large wind, and then small wind gets a higher number. Biomass has a certain number. That way, anybody can participate. And they have a low interest, no interest loan program so the farmer or homeowner can put this stuff in and make the money. They have a net profit from day one. And if we put that sort of system in, we could have huge increases in renewables fast. It's a way to ramp this, which right now the policies being debated in the U.S. tend to be incremental and slow. But we have to do things faster.
I really like your message of personal and local social involvement, pushing these ideas. I'm just wondering, how do you pose that we involve folks for whom being socially minded, at least environmentally, is not really an option because of their financial situation? How do you propose to get people involved all the way across Alaska?
Well, that's why things like a carbon tax could be used. When you tax carbon at the source, so it's taxed where it comes out of the oil well or the mine or whatever, that goes into a big pool of money where you can go and do assistance for low-income housing. I'm really baffled when I see pre-manufactured homes or mobile homes coming into the state. Every one of those mobile homes should have a solar hot water system on their roof so that when they park them, they at least face them south and all their hot water is free. That's part of the income problem, that a lot of what happens for the lower income people or our middle classes, we end up getting infrastructure in place that doesn't help their operating costs. And what we have to do is embed renewables, because then all your operating costs go down. So you can have, you're better off. But by using energy policy, you're also doing social policy changes.
Well, but then you still have that flat fee of then installing that infrastructure. And I'm going to make an assumption that I might be incorrect, but that's going to be more expensive than what is currently used in most mobile homes. So.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's a cost, but I think socially we should go and help with those costs to change the system, because fossil fuels being so cheap has made us go and do a lot of bad decisions as far as infrastructure. And we have to change our housing stock and all these pieces. It's going to take a huge investment. That's why I threw up the $1 trillion a year. It is huge of what we have to change. And what we have to do in a finite world is say, we only have so many resources. Let's start putting the resources in the right place. And that's why I'm not a big proponent of keep building SUVs and other things. Let's move it to a different way. And so the free market system doesn't always work, and we have to go and direct it with policy.
Following up on that question, could you talk a little bit about your experience creating your own company's business model and your building, and show how a deep commitment to sustainability actually gets you out in front of the profitability curve and solves this problem of extra cost and extra investment?
Sure. The driver on the building and the business is our business model is we do lean manufacturing. Lean manufacturing is this Toyota-based manufacturing system, but it's really simple. It's basically a sustainability model, because you're trying to get rid of waste and inefficiency and doing the wrong things. And so we've driven our business to get rid of things and also make our employee productivity higher. And so we don't waste people's time, because a person is valuable. You can't pay people a decent wage if you waste their time or have bad systems or have a bad business model. And our whole gauge, one of the gauges that we look at in our business is sales per employee. If that number is high enough, you can pay your employees well, you get productivity, and you get profits. And as far as the design of our building, we aggressively cut energy use in the design to that 1/5 number. In return, you cut all your systems, your heating system, your cooling system, your electric system is all downsized tremendously. In the end, even with $500,000 of solar on the facility, it only costs us 7% more than a typical building. So that's a small premium to do this. And basically what it did is it allowed us to fix our price of energy for the next 30 years. So by embedding all these things in, we now are better positioned competitively to go out in the world and compete because we fixed our energy prices and pre-bought basically 30 years of energy at a known price. And our view was energy was going to go up in price.
I was wondering if you could comment for the students who are going to go out and graduate and look for jobs, maybe with a socially responsible company. How do you differentiate yourself in terms of, you could be making ice cream instead of wind, but as a company, what should students be looking for?
That's a good question. Because of all the changes in the last few years, there's a lot of folks doing some of this stuff for marketing reasons. And for us, it was always baffling when we built our building. And after we almost finished it, there was all this interest in the building. It was baffling to us that people all of a sudden said, "Oh, what are you doing? We want to come and see it." We never did that, built the building for that reason. We did it for ourselves and our mission. And inadvertently, all this other stuff happens. So I worry about greenwashing. I worry about companies just saying things. But, I think in your interviewing, you have to ask some tough questions and see, do they really walk the talk? And I guess I don't have very precise answers, but it's really what they do and how they do it that matter. Just for instance, in our companies, we ship stuff around the world for free. People say, well, why do you do that? Well, there's a number of reasons. We want to lower our energy use when we ship things. If you allow the customer to pay for that, basically they'll airship, they'll do all these other things. I think I'm guilty of this with Amazon. I'm an Amazon Prime customer. They air freight everything. You can go to Amazon store and have Cheerios air freighted in 2 days. It's like, this is bizarre. It's not going to work in the future, but that's what the system is. So do I think Amazon is very socially responsible and energy aware? No. But for us to do free shipping, we do it by container or rail as much as we can, because that drives the energy costs down, saves us money, and it's an indicator of where we are and what we stand for.
I was going to ask for you to talk a little bit more about Earth Turbines and sort of the model you're using and specifically the cost and the payoff period, and also how big of a plot of land you need to do it, and if it can be done in like a more suburban area, and then the potential to have the whole home powered off of a turbine. I know you said you couldn't do it in your house, but...
Yeah. Starting with the land, we're looking at rural homeowners. We're not looking that wind will be an urban or suburban type of technology. Solar will be, or is, because it's on your roofs. And the cost right now is quite high. The small wind industry is basically where it was 25 years ago. Growing up in the large business, large wind, we saw the many generations of large wind progressing and all the gains in efficiency and cost. Small wind is sort of stuck in 25 years ago. So that's why I got involved in doing a small wind company. I think there's huge potential to drive down the cost. The cost today for our wind turbine is about $25,000. It would take about 20 years to pay itself off. But we have to start somewhere. The small wind industry is about a $30 million a year industry. The large industry is about $30 billion and growing rapidly. So we have a long ways to go. But it's that, it's like the first cars were very expensive. The first of anything is very expensive because of manufacturing volumes. So we hope to drive down that cost to half within the next 5 years, just by volume and experience in building an industry. And it's right on the doorstep. Solar is doing the same thing. Most technologies go through this cost curve that comes down as you grow the business. And so that's our goal. Yeah, that's a good question as far as do we have this global economy. I think the global economy will shrink back to more local. And as far as our companies, we're working to source everything we can local in the manufacturing companies. Now, that's hard with what's happened in China, but we're making a very dedicated effort to go local, even if it costs a little bit more. Because I believe with the supply chains and energy with going up, it's going to get more and more costly to bring things in from China and go back and forth. And we must have manufacturing capability in the U.S. We can't lose all of our manufacturing that's been here. Otherwise, we become dependent on the rest of the world with these huge supply chains. And so there's a huge effort to bring that back local.
Clustered environment with large open space, say on 50 acres. Could you build enough wind to power, say, 50% of referring project or something?
Yeah, the trick with small wind is it's going to be probably for home or individuals. The medium size, the community size, you will end up probably doing for retirement homes and so on because it's big enough. And what I think will happen is right now we tend to put wind in the windiest spots, and it's just like discovering oil. You find the most oil first, and as time goes on, you get more efficient and the costs come down. You will put wind in lower and lower wind speed places. So then you can get back into the Champlain Valley with medium-sized wind turbines. Right now, those turbines have to go in the mountains due to the economics. But as you get better and better, the technologies get better, the costs come down, we will go and populate the less windy areas over time. And it's that rule of thumb. You always find the best resources first, and then you go to the other ones later.
Speaking of the windiest areas, can you speak to your perceptions and thoughts on the Vermont Act 248 process, which is a similar process to Act 250 for utility sites?
Yeah, Section 248 regulates all wind and solar installations and power plant siting in the state and power lines. 248 is both a friend and a foe. I battled for a year under the net metering permit for just putting my wind turbine in at my house, and the battle was over aesthetics with a neighbor. So I felt the pain of a $6,000 lawyer bill and a year delay over the Queechy test in that law. But on the other side, it's streamlined permitting in that we don't go through local zoning, Act 250. So that's the other side of it. I think if we have strong public support and policy, we should streamline siting of wind and solar and these technologies. But the problem with the Public Service Board that runs this and the three-member board is it's very political. So it depends on who gets appointed as a chair of the PSB and what results you get. And I think that's why we had the East Mountain Wind Farm rejected. 3 turbines on that former Air Force base on the top of a mountain got rejected because it became political.
I was wondering if you could just elaborate a bit more on this kind of relationship between kind of government and public policy versus private sector action. And as part of that, to talk about where you see the capital for this transition to new energy is going to come from. How much is government, how much is going to be just driven through private markets, venture capitalists, hedge funds, Warren Buffett, et cetera?
Well, there's a lot of capital now chasing renewables in the new green economy. It's really the next big wave. I think there's probably a fair amount of that private capital available. If you line up your public policy to have the right incentives and have it good enough, the capital will come. But if it's incremental, not strong enough, it won't come. In Germany, it came. The Germans went from 2% renewables to 12% in 10 years. huge, massive amounts of money were spent, but it wasn't necessarily public money. A lot of private capital showed up in Germany. And so the capital tends to go in the world where the best incentives and deals are and the best returns. Germany as a country has tremendous, they were the largest installed base of wind until this year. The United States passed them again. But they're not very windy compared to what we have in the U.S. And an example of the German success is a utility, E.ON, fought wind in Germany for many years. Last year they came to the U.S. and for $1.6 billion bought one of our largest wind farm developers. So they got religion and said, oh, this is a good deal. But they fought wind in their own country for years. But I think the capital will flow, but we really have to work harder on our policy. Feed-in tariffs, very transparent ways of policy to get things built and get things done. And it's not going to be controlled by the utilities. One of our problems is the utilities tend to control power purchase contracts and how wind is sold into the market. It should be public policy, standard offers to anybody that comes, and you can then drive a business.
Time for one more question.
The kinds of things we're talking about, really dramatic changes in sources of energy. Now it's kind of hard, I think, to get your head around. And I often wonder what things would look like as we walk around, drive around the state. What would it look like if we were getting 100% of our energy from renewable sources?
What would it look like? Okay. You would have a large number of wind turbines on our hills. You'll have solar in almost everyone's house roof. You'll have some solar trackers on some people's yards. You will have some biomass. Some people will be burning wood pellets. Some people will be burning wood. You will have a mass transit system that works. You will have electric trains going from Middlebury to Burlington. You will have a walkable community. You will have farms around supplying your food. We will become much more local. And I think you will have a much nicer world, because right now we're exporting into most of the other parts of the world all of our impacts, as you know. The destruction of the rainforests in Brazil. All these things are happening that are outside of our view, but I think the view in Vermont will be quite beautiful because it's all ours now. Our energy's here, our food's here. All these pieces are now back where we can see them. I'm a proponent of the clothesline law. We can't get past in our state legislature a simple thing that says you're allowed to have a clothesline at your house. There's covenants in a lot of people's deeds, condos. You are not allowed to hang your clothes to dry them. That's horrible. I wouldn't mind seeing people's clothes. I hang our clothes out. And that's very important because every load of clothes in your dryer is $1. 7 kilowatts of electricity. It's a total waste. So we have to start changing our look on things. The reason there's clothesline are banned because people didn't want to see people's clothes hanging. But, going forward, we aren't going to have much of a choice. Our society's survival is at stake as we know it. We have a very highly technical, intellectual society that's been based on cheap energy. If we're going to survive with this technology, we're going to have to go this other route. Otherwise, our society may crash and never recover. Our technology may get lost, but it's all driven by the energy that goes into it. And somehow or another, we got to change this, and it's going to be quite dramatic, the change that has to happen. So, in closing, all of you folks are key to making this change. So, and I'm kind of radical at times, so I just ask you, whenever you're hesitating to be a little bit more radical or not, be more radical. Thank you.
Thank you.